Hello everybody! Today we're doing something a bit different. While I usually respond to people on my podcast, this video hit me in a different place that I felt the need to make a scripted response. Today's offering is Doktor Skipper's Godzilla Doesn't Work in America video. A video that has been eviscerated quite thoroughly. However, I feel like most of the people responding to it haven't gone far enough into just how horrendous it gets. However, while I will be showing Monster Hunter footage while I talk for the most part, I will still provide references for my claims. So, let's all suffer together, shall we?
Gojira, also known as Godzilla, is the most popular piece of Japanese media ever created. Let's just pretend anime is not a thing, okay, for like 20 minutes. Godzilla is so popular that a lot of people didn't even know that it originated in Japan, or that it's in the public domain in the United States, since Toho, the company that created Godzilla, never expected the freak lizard to get Marvelized one day. So they didn't renew and manipulate the copyright system like a certain company that does with all their beloved IPs.
Walt Disney?
Breaking news, Mickey Mouse is now public domain. Oh wait, never mind, just Steamboat Willie. Not even that. The name is still claimed by Disney, so the only legal way to name it is Boat Rat Drives Boat. But this free copyright for Godzilla is only in America.
42 seconds and we already have multiple inaccuracies. The first bit is whatever. I would argue Pokemon should be the other example and not anime, considering it is the most profitable franchise in human history, but it's not an unfounded comparison. However, to say most people think Godzilla isn't a Japanese product requires some hefty citations if you're going to state it as a fact. I don't really know how one could even think Godzilla wasn't a Japanese product considering the bad dubbing, the fact that most of the characters are all Japanese with Japanese names, Godzilla and other monsters destroy or attack Japanese cities, the King Caesar, Mothra, and Jet Jaguar songs were all sung in Japanese in the dubs. And perhaps the best piece of evidence being Blue Oyster Cult's song about Godzilla having the lyric, "Oh no, there goes Tokyo." From my own personal experience, everyone I've ever known in my life knows Godzilla is a Japanese product. Lastly, we have the absolutely absurd statement that Godzilla is public domain in America. This is factually untrue. Toho still owns the domestic and global rights to Godzilla. There is a single photo of Godzilla that is public domain, but the entire franchise, both in the US and Japan, is still owned by Toho. I have no idea where Skipper got this, and it's embarrassing he didn't bother to do further research into it. This was 42 seconds, by the way, and in that time he made two major errors that needed correcting. Said corrections taking longer to state than the errors themselves, so I don't want any chronophobes to complain about the video's length. Skipper goes on a diatribe about his history with Godzilla, which is fine in and of itself. I'm all for some pre-ramble or setting up a point to be paid off later in the video. Mahler's Star Wars Cannot Grow Up video does the latter very well. However, when it goes on for over a minute without making a point or setting up a point, it starts to become a bit tedious and frustrating, especially since that time could have been put into showing references for the two statements earlier in the video. It doesn't give off a very good first impression. Skipper appears to be more interested in ADHD editing and telling jokes than actually backing up claims he's made, but we're only 3 minutes in. Perhaps it gets better.
Also, there's a big thing I need to address in this video. I kinda hate Godzilla, if we're gonna be honest.
Now, this is gonna sound strange, but I'm gonna run a little defense for Skipper here. So just hear me out. I think it's perfectly fine to make videos on things you hate. The Last Jedi made entire careers after all. The vitriolic hatred many felt towards it was fueled by their love of Star Wars. My own disdain for Man of Steel comes from my love of Superman, and how Snyder and Goyer portrayed him. It's incredibly stupid to outright dismiss anything anyone says on a topic just because they hate that topic. All that matters is if they know that topic and can put aside their hatred for an objective analysis. Skipper then goes on to compare Godzilla to Jurassic Park, where the first movie was really good, but the subsequent films saw a steady decrease in quality. Which is a true statement, but I'm not sure what this has to do with how Godzilla doesn't work in America.
This is what happened with Godzilla. I don't have any nostalgia for the old Godzilla movies, yet I still watched them a bit when I was a kid.
The fuck?
And even rewatched them recently when I got the idea for this video. So no bias. 98% of them suck ass.
No bias? You literally said you hate Godzilla, but words I guess don't have meaning. On the statement of most Godzilla movies being bad, I haven't done a full rewatch of them myself. However, I'm willing to bet that at least half of them are indeed bad. Though, I could be wrong, so I'll simply move on.
Godzilla fell into the same trap that all successful franchises eventually fall into. Godzilla's look was more fascinating to shareholders and executives than the original intentions and creativity that made him even exist in the first place. So they spammed out Godzilla films. He's fighting bugs. He's fighting mechanized versions of himself. He's fighting three-headed dragons. He's doing shit like this. Because why the hell not? And some of the films are fun, I'll admit it, but for the most part, a lot of the legacy of Godzilla just reeks of cheaply made cash grabs. So when Godzilla turned into a cartoon for kids, a lot of adults stopped caring.
What is this shit?
So then the cycle reset, and this time Goji went to America.
While it's true the Showa era became a live-action cartoon, I see you skipped the Heisei and Millennium eras, both of which had films like The Return of Godzilla, which retconned everything but the first film and tried to be more like it. Godzilla vs. Destroya portrays Godzilla's death as a somber tragedy. GMK has Godzilla as a wrathful revenant fueled by the hatred of the dead for being forgotten. Sure, the Heisei era evolves into complete nonsense very quickly, and the Millennium era has 5 different continuities because why the fuck not, I guess. Despite this, however, none of them intentionally portray themselves as a cartoon. Well, except maybe Final Wars. It's pretty odd you'd skip 2 whole eras. Did you not bother to watch them? You used footage from them earlier in the video, so you had access to them at least. Curious that. I don't think you could watch those eras and come away with them being cheaply made cash grabs. At least not all of them. So either your ability to analyze media is ass, you're lying, you didn't watch them, or it's a bit of all 3. Which one it is will remain to be seen. So let's continue.
Where the same thing happened again. We got a serious Godzilla, and people complained that it was too serious with not enough Godzilla, so the franchise became Looney Tunes. And the sequel somehow had worse human characters, and then people got annoyed with Millie Bobby Brown, the fat kid from Deadpool, and Alfred from Atlanta spilling water on a computer to fry Mechagodzilla's motherboard to save the day. And this made some people not really like Godzilla that much anymore.
Most of that is true, except for the implication that 2014 had bad characters, which I will get into a bit later. Skipper then goes down a rabbit hole explaining the history behind unrelated films that served as inspiration to the first film, which is mostly irrelevant. So far, we've only talked about the current American Godzilla films and how they became clown movies for a few seconds. I would imagine you'd put the history and inspirations of the first film when you were talking about the general history of the franchise. Even then, it'd still be bloat. You could easily summarize this and Ishiro Honda's experience of World War II and how they affected the making of the original film. We especially don't need a brief history on Toho Studios and a bit of World War II, as that is 100% irrelevant to the topic of Godzilla not working in America, hence why I'll be skipping most of it. I say mostly because we have another factual inaccuracy.
America started trolling and did a nuclear test on their hydrogen bomb in the Pacific. The bomb was much bigger than the scientists expected, so the radiation caught up to a Japanese boat named the Lucky Dragon No. 5, which killed all the crew via radiation.
Only one person on the Lucky Dragon died, and this is why reading is important. It allows you to be correct. Skipper finally starts talking about the original film, and it's what you'd expect, giving it the praise it deserves.
Gojira is still objectively a war film that provoked a lot of discussion and thought.
Is it though? Is it really a war film? You could say it's about the consequences and aftermath of war and the potential dangers of nuclear energy. This isn't a big issue, mind you. He's not really wrong, just narrow-minded in his view.
1954 Gojira is also why I don't like it when Godzilla is an action prop. It just feels like Boat Rat drives boat to me, since I see the character more as a man versus nature, rather than fighting toys for children. This is why Godzilla 2014 by Gareth Edwards is the best version of Godzilla in the States.
I can certainly agree with that, though I don't mind if Godzilla is an action prop as long as the movie itself is good. It can and has worked in the past. And 2014 is certainly the best out of the prolapsing, pus-filled wound that is the Monsterverse. Not only that, it's actually my second favorite Godzilla movie. But now, halfway through the video, do we finally get to the main talking point. First, Skipper gives a brief summary of the strengths of 2014, mainly how it makes the monsters feel huge and its grounded approach, which is correct.
2014 Godzilla is the most grounded of the Monsterverse films, having the most restraint while using Godzilla on frame in unique ways. It's still one of the best looking Godzilla films due to the directing by Gareth Edwards that relies a ton on perspective shots.
However, the good times can't last.
But 2014's human problem has a lot to do with how Godzilla is structured and how it being in the US hinders its storytelling. American Godzilla as a whole is an oxymoron thing to begin with. A thing made to represent America's atomic bomb on Japan is now being used for American heroism. So because of this, you can't really get that much depth with Godzilla since he's the protagonist ally to the American military.
Well, that was just a bunch of bullshit that was flung our way. First, please explain the structural issues. Until you do, Hitchens' law will apply. Same with how being an American-made film hinders its storytelling. On what planet do you think the 2014 Godzilla is being used for American heroism? Never once does he actively save anyone. In fact, he indirectly kills so many people in this movie. He creates a massive tidal wave that kills at least a few dozen people just by getting out of the water. And he plows through a bridge, killing potentially hundreds more. And that's not even considering those that were killed during his fight with the Mutos. Godzilla is consistently portrayed as a neutral, uncaring force of nature, only interested in self-preservation. Yeah, the applause at the end of the movie is kinda weird, but to say he's being used for American heroism is just wrong. The most retarded thing, however, is to say that he's the protagonist ally to the American military. The only reference, if you could even call it that, he gives are the aircraft carriers following Godzilla, which is a horrible example. You see, this is after the scene where Godzilla causes many deaths and destroys a big portion of Honolulu in his fight with the male Muto. The military is doing the logical thing of keeping tabs on the giant destructive monsters so they can plan accordingly.
Have all vessels maintain current distance from target and plot the speed and heading of these things. I want to know exactly when and where they're going to make landfall.
I'm getting the sneaking suspicion he didn't watch the movie.
The US doesn't have the same history of catastrophe as Japan did with the atomic bomb.
Correct, but we also have a rich history of natural disasters. Hurricanes, floods, earthquakes, forest fires, blizzards, movie Bob. So it would stand to reason that when adapting Godzilla to an American audience, those would be the things we'd have the monsters represent. Oh, and would you look at that? That's exactly what happened.
And America is also obsessed with patriotism.
You thought the Tismic editing and scatterbrained script was going to be the worst part. But now ye must gaze upon the truest of cringe that I have and despair.
So instead of making Godzilla an allegory for the consequences of mankind's actions, or have a much larger depth of Godzilla being a force of nature against the United States, he's now instead Superman, where he gets recontextualized to be Superman.
Are you going to explain why it has to be these two options? If not, then your input is worthless. What's inherently wrong with Godzilla being a neutral force of nature? There's nothing to counter if all you do is say the idea is bad and don't explain why. As for making Godzilla Superman, that's factually wrong. Godzilla is not trying to save people nor acts in a friendly manner. The late Showa era gives Godzilla a far more Superman-like presentation than the entire Monsterverse ever did, and lost far more of the original meaning behind the monster. So, I guess Godzilla doesn't work in Japan either by your standards.
Which is hilarious when you rewatch 2014's Godzilla with this perspective after watching Japanese Godzilla films. First off, that hydrogen bomb test that destroyed the Lucky Dragon 5, which got the 1954 movie made in the first place, well, now the history has changed, and the hydrogen bomb was used to attack Godzilla on that test drop to protect the greater mankind, and it accidentally made him bigger.
Once again, gonna need you to explain your point, bud. Why is not having the Lucky Dragon incident in the movie a bad thing? Why do you make it sound like the historical event was erased from history by a movie? How is this evidence as to why Godzilla doesn't work in America? Also, the nuke didn't make Godzilla bigger. Never once was it implied or said in the movie that they did, and of course you give no reference for this, but that's to be expected.
And after being threatened by this walking nuke and realizing there's nothing the US could do about it, it's now going to be the savior to America against the Japanese threat that was forced out of hiding by humanity that then attacks Hawaii. Where then the Japanese threat gets killed by a walking nuke that goes down in a heroic sacrifice.
Alright, I think I have an idea of what's going on here. This is a bit more than just not watching the movie. There is nothing, at all, that implies that because the US couldn't do anything about Godzilla, they decided to make them their hero. It's after the military's plan to kill the Mutos backfires that they rely on Godzilla. At that point, they're out of any other option. Godzilla hasn't emerged in 60 years and isn't running around destroying everything. Logically, this means that if he wins, they can at least infer he'll go back to a state of dormancy for a while. The way Skipper phrased it makes it sound like a 180 turn in their feelings towards Godzilla, which isn't the case at all. The only thing that they can do is get the nuke as far away from the city as possible. In fact, the entire original plan was to have Godzilla and the Mutos killed.
But if we rig a nuclear warhead with a shielded timer, put it on a boat and send it 20 miles out, the radiation lures the Mutos, and the Mutos lure Godzilla.
And we detonate.
As for the Mutos being a Japanese threat, they were both lying dormant in the Philippines. The male woke up and headed to the Janjira power plant to feed on the radiation and make a cocoon, while the female is taken to the US to be stored with their highly radioactive materials. And what about Godzilla collapsing strikes you as heroic? Because if you were actually being honest, which I am now convinced that you aren't, at least to some degree, you would know Godzilla is not being heroic. Sure, killing the Mutos is portrayed as triumphant. He did something cool, so let's give the audience some fitting music after he wins the day, but nothing about it is heroic because Godzilla is killing them out of self-preservation. The Mutos start out like parasites that act very much like tarantula hawk larvae, eating their host's nuclear power source. It's only when they start moving around does Godzilla become more active, which makes sense. The Mutos are a massive threat to his survival, so he goes to take them out. The monsters in this movie are just animals. There is no malicious intent to their actions. The Mutos don't destroy things for the sake of destruction. They're either eating, gathering food for their young, or making a nest. Neither Godzilla nor the Mutos really care much about the humans. Only when the Mutos' eggs are destroyed, or when they're attacked by the military, do they try and kill the humans. These things are not that hard to understand.
That goes down in a heroic sacrifice, and then he decides he's got one more in him, so he gets up and everyone claps for him as fighter jets fly by, saving the day as he goes back into the water. Take in mind, like, thousands of people have probably died to Godzilla, and by the looks of it, evacuation seems to be terrible.
So your statement about Godzilla making heroic sacrifice is even more retarded. We already knew that, but I digress. However, I agree it's a bit strange how everyone is applauding the giant monster that has likely killed hundreds of people. This is a bit odd, but not enough to support your point when everything else proves you wrong. As for the evacuation bit, the scene that you show takes place a few hours after the nuke goes off. The amount of destruction the monsters caused in their fight was immense, and it's going to take a while to evacuate all of them. Even then, we see an entire stadium full of people who have been rescued. I wonder why you would leave that out.
It's funny when watching it because at first Godzilla isn't even the main focus of this Godzilla movie. It's this Japanese threat that Walter White was warning everyone about, and then Godzilla only comes on screen to handle business. And when he's attacked by the US military, at first he doesn't even retaliate or go beast mode.
That's the third time you've called the Mutos Japanese. I'm beginning to suspect an ulterior motive here. Why would you keep calling them Japanese? If it was the male, you'd still be wrong, but I could somewhat understand it. But you're calling both of them Japanese when the female woke up in Nevada after being taken there.
Focus the search on Nevada.
Nevada.
Doctor, where is it?
Where you put all your nuclear waste.
What reason would there be in repeating this factual inaccuracy without giving any reference to back up what you're saying? Now, I don't have much evidence for this, so take it with a grain of salt, but I think you're being a bit dishonest here, Mr. Skipper. But why would Skipper be dishonest if this was the case? Well, there's some stuff later in the video that may reveal why. As for why Godzilla doesn't attack the military that's shooting at him, he plows through the bridge, taking out the military personnel there. But more importantly, he is only focused on killing the Mutos. He is so close to them that to him it doesn't really matter if he's getting shot at. It's also possible that because he's about to fight, he wants to conserve energy. Are those good explanations? Maybe. Maybe not. But they're far more plausible than what Skipper is implying. That the writers, producers, or whoever are trying to plant the idiotic notion that Godzilla doesn't want to attack the American military because they wanted to make him a US ally or some such nonsense.
This dude is only hyper-focused on destroying this Japanese threat and shares this sparkle with the main character where they save each other. It's quite beautiful, actually, how much Godzilla cares about the whole world.
That's the fourth fucking time you've called them Japanese. You know, if you said the silent part out loud, I could at least say you'd have some balls calling the movie racist, or at least anti-Japanese, because that's what you're implying here. The American hero killing the Japanese monsters and being applauded for it. Of course, he couldn't come right out and say it because it would embarrass him even more than this video already has. Going on to the next point, sure, Godzilla and Ford save each other, but it wasn't intentional. You showed the wrong scene with Ford, by the way. The scene where Ford blows up the eggs, causing the Mutos to stop ganging up on Godzilla and go check on their eggs, is what should have been shown. This act unintentionally saved Godzilla because it distracted the Mutos enough for him to recover. Ford's entire goal was destroying the eggs, not saving Godzilla. The female was distracted by trying to kill Ford because he blew up the eggs to give Godzilla the opening he needed to kill her. Godzilla's intent was not to save Ford, but to kill the Muto. So while they did save each other, it's not in the way Skipper is portraying. That being, they did so intentionally.
It's quite beautiful, actually, how much Godzilla cares about the whole world. No, he just cares about the US.
Didn't you mention how Godzilla killed a bunch of people earlier in the video?
Take in mind, like, thousands of people have probably died to Godzilla.
So, you know this happens, and yet you make that statement. Seems a bit contradictory, especially since you explain your points about as well as a lobotomized squirrel. But can it get worse?
Because when he goes to China, even that shit gets absolutely decimated in his ego fight with the gorilla.
You're seriously gonna make me defend Godzilla vs. Kong. I don't have enough paint thinner for this, but sure. Throughout the film, Godzilla is tracking the leftover presence of Ghidorah stored in Mechagodzilla and his pieces so he can eliminate them. Said pieces are being stored in Apex facilities, one of which resides in Pensacola, an American city. Godzilla, for the first time, destroys man-made structures intentionally, not as a byproduct of his presence or battles. Mechagodzilla is also being stored in China. Once Godzilla picks up a signal emitted by Mechagodzilla, he goes there to try and destroy it. Even from a metaphorical standpoint, it's not about America destroying China or whatever retarded nonsense you're implying. How in the fuck do you not accurately criticize Godzilla vs. Kong? That's like losing a foot race to a quadruple amputee. That's like a literate adult failing a kindergarten English test. That's like saying less in a movie review than Chris Stuckman. It's one of the easiest movies to critique. From the broken world building, horrendously choreographed fight scenes, ass dialogue, non-existent characters, retcons that destroy what little understanding we had left of this retarded universe. All of that, and you reach into your colon to pull out this garbage. Also, fuck you for making me defend this incomprehensible sack of sludge. I made a review of it that all of you should watch. It's better than this shit.
Making Godzilla Superman is strange.
It's really funny that you show this clip when you say that.
Good thing he's on our side.
For now.
Which was kind of paid off in Godzilla vs. Kong, where Godzilla is the antagonist for the majority of the film.
And later in the Monsterverse, they try to add depth to this. Like, look, he actually killed a bus full of children, and this company called Monarch is really shady with documentation and control, and the whole world is still full of PTSD, which is cool at first, but then you remember this is the same guy in the same world where he teamed up with a monkey to fight a robot version of him that was made by a three-headed dragon that got defeated because water was spilt on the computer, and then Godzilla and the monkey are teaming up to fight more monkeys, and now there's a baby monkey, and now he's pinking in Fortnite. Yeah, it's over.
Yep, this universe is a broken mess. I agree. Moving on.
American Godzilla doesn't really stand for anything. Even in the 2014 film, the human characters are just a guy we follow around and his family. The United States military is skeptical at first of Godzilla's involvement, but then they just accept that he is the only hero capable of stopping the Mutos, and all is fine. There's no discussion or nuance about anything in the world. The Mutos that were awakened are instantly vilified without any nuance either. These things were forced to wake up, and all they wanted to do was produce and have kids.
First off, I can only guess what you mean by doesn't stand for anything, because you didn't bother to explain it. If you mean any kind of thematic message and what the monsters represent, then you're wrong. Godzilla is representative of nature's balance, correcting anything that throws it off. However, nature balancing itself is rarely, if ever, a peaceful process. Once an earthquake starts, you have to ride it out until it's done. The Mutos represent the imbalance. Their niche in the ecosystem has been filled, and taking it again will cause permanent damage to the current natural order. This entire issue, however, is the fault of humanity's ever-expanding progress, as shown when a mining operation causes the male Muto to wake up and set the entire plot into motion. This stuff isn't me looking too deep into it, by the way.
Nature has an order, a power to restore balance. I believe he is that power.
The arrogance of man is thinking nature is in our control, and not the other way around.
King of the Monsters continues this theme with the release of Ghidorah catastrophically altering the natural order of things. A creature so powerful he can alter the weather itself. An invasive species let loose by humanity, leaving Godzilla to try and fix it. The use of the oxygen destroyer, however, stops Godzilla from restoring balance, and due to his alien nature, Ghidorah survives it, while Godzilla is heavily injured. Humanity interfering with nature's balance allows Ghidorah to begin reworking the natural order. Godzilla vs. Kong takes this idea further with Mechagodzilla. Humanity creating a monster of their own in an attempt to take nature's balance into their own hands. But more importantly, Apex has disrupted the most fundamental natural law. Everything must die eventually. By using Ghidorah's brain, they have broken that law. This is enough to get Godzilla to attack humanity directly for the first time. Sure, it's not very nuanced, and in the case of Godzilla vs. Kong, botched beyond all imagination, but not everything has to be nuanced. Only like 4 films in the entire franchise work if we go by this metric. What's the nuanced discussion in Godzilla vs. Hedorah, or Godzilla vs. Mothra, or Tokyo SOS? This is why you have to better explain yourself, because there are obvious faults in your broken logic. You take these broad claims and refuse to elaborate, leaving everyone confused and your foot with a massive hole in it. Because despite calling the majority of the franchise terrible, cheap cash grabs, I don't think you'd ever say Japan often doesn't understand Godzilla. Even you would call that silly. Now's the part where I defend the characters in 2014. Please note I am not saying the characters are well realized and fully developed, because as much as I like and miss Ford, he is pretty bland and the rest of them besides Joe are pretty meh. It's more of the potential Ford had as a character that I like, rather than what we got. However, to say it's just a guy and his family is a bit reductive. We do follow Ford and his family, but there is more going on. Ford and Joe have a strained relationship due to the tragic death of Ford's mother, which led Joe to obsess over it, coming up with conspiracies and becoming so obsessed he gets arrested for trespassing onto a restricted area, driving a wedge between them.
It's just, every time I let him in close, he always tries to drag me back, and I can't put our family through that.
Despite this, he goes to Japan to bail Joe out, showing that despite all the things he put him through, Ford still loves him and wants the best for him.
Come home with me. Got a little boy who's desperate to see his grandpa.
Fast forward to when both of them are being transported after the male escapes. Joe says his last words to Ford.
Go home to your family. Keep them safe. Whatever it takes.
Ford's primary motivation is now set. He will do whatever is needed to save what's left of his family from the monsters that took his parents. A simple motivation, but a consistent one. To bring all this back to the video, labeling the human portion as just some guy and his family implies we get nothing on the character front, which is not true. We have a father and son ripped apart by tragedy, and before they can begin to repair it, Joe dies. And so Ford must prevent losing what he has left. I'll certainly agree it's underdeveloped and needed more attention, but it's there and it's mostly consistent throughout. As for the military accepting Godzilla as the one and only means to save them, you cut out the part where their plan to kill all three monsters failed miserably, leaving that to be their only option. A big part of the climax is getting the nuke out of San Francisco, the same nuke the military was going to use to kill the monsters that the Mutos took as food for their eggs. This is impossible to miss unless you didn't pay attention, or you're a massive dumbass. Saying the Mutos are vilified is technically correct. However, they are portrayed as animals simply following their natural instincts. Neither of them attack humans for no reason. It's only when their eggs are destroyed or when they're attacked do they focus on killing people, specifically those that destroyed their eggs or are attacking them. Now yes, they're the antagonists, but they're not shown as evil as Skipper is implying.
But their children were blown up by Quicksilver, then the parents were murdered by Godzilla, and everyone still claps in the end, even though everything's still in shambles and a shitload of people died!
Yup, and I've already said twice how the applause at the end is weird, but it's not as bad as you're making it out to be. It's more of an audience cue, if anything. The day is saved and Godzilla did something cool, so the audience should clap. It's more of a nitpick, honestly.
This is drastically different from the 1954 version, where Godzilla is treated as a victim, even after he terrorizes and kills a bunch of innocent Japanese people.
Yes, different films with different goals will do different things. I fail to see this concept as an issue.
And instead of clapping when the threat is gone, the audience is instead reminded that Godzilla never needed to happen in the first place, and that because of bomb testing, he's now also robbed of life.
Are we really doing the different from the source material, therefore bad retardation? Changes to certain things are fine as long as it works within the adaptation's own rules. Sure, there's keeping to the spirit of it. A Superman adaptation could have him being a depressed sandwich that genocides his own race and be good, but that's not really the spirit of Superman. It's about balancing what does and does not translate. And Godzilla is ultimately about man versus nature, something you admitted the 2014 film does.
Since I see the character more as a man versus nature, rather than fighting toys for children. This is why Godzilla 2014 by Gareth Edwards is the best version of Godzilla in the States.
But ultimately, a poor adaptation can still be good as long as it adheres to basic logical consistency.
American Godzilla being a Superman figure is really safe and boring and makes no sense due to the origins of the character.
He is not a Superman figure as I've demonstrated earlier. If by safe you mean a more traditional story, then explain why that is bad. There are plenty of stories that you could call safe that are masterpieces. Lord of the Rings is incredibly safe. A classic good versus evil story where the Dark Lord is defeated and peace is brought to Middle-earth. From a story perspective, there aren't too many risks taken, and yet they're perhaps the best movies I've ever seen. The Last Jedi takes a lot of risks, and The Last Jedi is dog shit.
That's how we're gonna win. Not fighting what we hate. Saving what we love.
Calling something safe tells me nothing of the quality. Boring is perhaps the most worthless criticism imaginable. It tells me nothing about how a movie doesn't work. It only tells me about your own personal feelings, and those mean little, if anything, when discussing quality. Especially if you're trying to prove that a concept doesn't work. And I guess that's confirmation that Japan making Godzilla a superhero type figure is fine as a concept. Why is it okay they get to do it and not America? No reason. Perhaps if Skipper explained his point better, he wouldn't look so idiotic.
2014 Godzilla isn't flawed because it has human characters and barely shows Godzilla with only a little bit of action fights. Because as we see later, those movies are even worse. 2014 is flawed because it doesn't stand for anything.
Setting aside that I've already debunked that claim, not standing for something isn't a flaw. It has no impact on mechanical coherency or general consistency, which are among the most important things in storytelling. However, I don't really think a story is capable of not standing for something in some capacity. Then again, Skipper has refused to even explain what he means by stand for something. Nor has he even shown how American Godzilla doesn't.
And is a safe depiction that makes this Americanized monster a hero without anything to say.
Now explain why that's bad, please. If you can't, then I'll simply apply Hitchens' razor, as I've debunked these claims already.
And I know 1954 is old, and that movie is aged, but recently a movie has come out that has blown all the Godzilla movies in the past 10 years out the water, and it was from Toho Studios, where Godzilla is back in Japan, and that movie was Takashi Yamazaki's Godzilla -1.
Finally! A take that isn't cringe-inducingly wrong. -1 is fantastic, and Skipper goes on talking about it, and I don't really have anything to add. Except that he used Shin Godzilla footage when talking about it.
So to watch a Godzilla movie with compelling human characters, nuanced discussion with critiques on the Japanese government, while having havoc and consequences that feel impactful, while also having an antagonist that is menacing, threatening, and terrifying.
A movie he didn't mention for some reason, despite it having all the things that he likes in a Godzilla movie. But then again, it might be too patriotic for his tastes, but we'll see that a bit later.
Which brings up a huge point for why this movie exists. It's once again an anti-war film where you're reminded that the Imperial Japan military was not great and that the modern Japanese government is not that great either.
It's also about facing the fears that control you, to finally break the grip it has on you and take it head on. Because only then can you truly live your life. Yes, it shows the consequences of war and the damage that was done to the Japanese, and how the government treated its veterans poorly, but there's so much more to the film than war is bad. Skipper then goes on a diatribe about how Japan depicts itself in media as war victims despite their history, and goes deep into it, which is really irrelevant to the topic of the video, and I have nothing to really add.
Which brings us back to why America can't do Godzilla. Back in 1954, when Godzilla came to the US, it was censored and remarketed to look like a fun blockbuster, similar to something like The Beast of 20,000 Fathoms, cutting 20 minutes of crucial political discussion, where then after the main lead was an inserted American reporter, where then the critiques of America's nuclear testing and nuclear power were also censored and changed. 1956 Godzilla King of the Monsters is a spineless shit movie that gutted the original impact of the 1954 version, and represents how the United States often views critical media.
The original Americanization does needlessly gut a lot out of the original, but as far as the whole "how can Americans sympathize with non-Americans" shit goes, it's among the best. Still, I'm not going to go and really defend the censorship at play.
So when we look at the depth of something like -1 and then go back to 2014, you see more cracks of how 2014 has nothing to say.
Saying something over and over doesn't make it true, Skipper.
My friend Sweets is Online gave me a quote when we were talking about this video. If you want to know what the biggest piggy bank is in the world, look at the United States military.
By the throne, I can feel some high impact-tism about to come my way.
Funding games like Call of Duty, movies like Top Gun, and many other pieces of media to display the United States military. You could get a lot of your budget paid when you display the military as heroic badasses. But now you have restrictions of being a puppet, not able to bite the hand that feeds you. United States propaganda is so prevalent that you might not even know it's propaganda. To film with American military technology and vehicles is expensive. Thus, why the Department of Defense will give you money, tax breaks, and access to display the military in your film in hopes that people might want to enlist. But the catch is that the DoD has to approve your script and messaging of how the military is depicted.
Your politics bore me.
What could Skipper mean by this, chat? What could he be implying?
Thus, we bring up Vietnam. The Vietnam War is heavily scrutinized in American history due to how badly they failed in that conflict and how it was overall pointless. So you have films that represent the brutality of the United States as well as the incompetence, like Apocalypse Now and Full Metal Jacket. And surprise, surprise, they got no funding from the piggy bank. Also, you know that movie Forrest Gump, where Sheriff Woody was in Vietnam? Well, that segment was critical of Vietnam, so the script was changed by the Department of Defense because if they didn't, they'd also get no money from the piggy bank. When you do more research yourself, you see how much America cares about their image due to the films being seen nationwide. So they make sure that America looks cool and noble no matter what, even if the truth might not be so.
Yes, Vietnam sucked. We all know this. What I'm more interested in is why not being critical of the US makes Godzilla not work in America. I know I'll never get an answer, but we continue forward as always.
So when you see Godzilla 2014 with a budget of $160 million, with American Navy and bomb squads and Air Force all helping Godzilla save the day, it's no surprise that the film had an agreement with the Department of Defense where they provided locations, vehicles, and military representation. And while at times the military is incompetent and kind of useless in the film, it's never acknowledged or critiqued with grand messaging.
Why does it fucking matter if they're criticized or not, you feckless toad? And by fuck up, you mean endanger all of San Francisco. But more importantly, you missed the entire point. There was a criticism. That being...
The arrogance of man is thinking nature is in our control, and not the other way around.
The whole point of the nuke fuck-up was to show that man's need to control nature is futile. Nature being represented by the monsters. Oh, but it's not specifically a condemnation of the US military, so it doesn't count, right? Sorry if I'm coming across a bit annoyed, but Skipper has just spent the last 24 minutes and 4 seconds being the definition of Hitchens' razor, and it really gets to me when people refuse to substantiate their points.
Because like I said, to bite the hand that feeds you is going to drop your budget from $160 million to a low $15 million like Godzilla Minus One. It's why Godzilla can't work in America. To be critical of the United States government requires you to be independent.
What utter fucking nonsense. That sentence makes no fucking sense. How exactly does not being able to criticize the military without losing money mean that Godzilla can't work in America? And how does being critical of America by default mean you're independent? I'm just... Hitchens' razor or whatever.
And by how bloated the film industry is with high film budgets and how propaganda has affected how the Godzilla character is viewed, you make more money by having Godzilla be Superman, killing tons of innocent people more than they clap at him saving the day.
Movies have bloated budgets these days. That's certainly true. And what propaganda? You haven't substantiated that claim. And you do understand that Godzilla's general perception prior to 2014 was that of the Showa era, right? That's when those movies were being shown in theaters for the most part. The Heisei and Millennium eras were largely relegated to home video or TV where nerds like me would discover them. Godzilla 1985 and Godzilla 2000 being the only exceptions. 2014 was the first time a lot of people were exposed to a serious Godzilla movie. The perception up until that time was the superhero-like persona and action figures smashing together. This is nothing fucking new, and acting like it shows me just how much of a dumbass you are.
Rather than him destroying the United States with the government losing and being useless.
And here we have it. The blatant bias you clearly have. Not just in your personal taste of Godzilla movies, but what message you want in them. Preferring the more serious and grounded films with a more layered or critical message is fine but not necessary. Your disdain for the US military has been showing for a while, but it really culminates here. Calling anything that portrays the military as not terrible, or is not a critique of its history or actions, propaganda, is incredibly retarded. Nothing about any of these movies gives off that impression. The military's fuck-ups in 2014 and King of the Monsters put more lives in danger, and in the case of the latter, led to unparalleled destruction. And no, working with the US military for locations and equipment does not by default make something propaganda. There is nothing about them that gives misleading or biased information about the US and its actual history. Nor do they promote a particular political point of view, and you failed to prove that they do so. The military doesn't come in and completely solo the monsters and takes all the credit and American flags being waved everywhere or some such nonsense. unless you can show me where they changed the script for any of these movies, you're not just wrong, you're fractally wrong.
And this has been a problem since 1956, when America turned a tragedy film to a blockbuster, gutting it of any meaning.
The 1956 King of the Monsters is not a blockbuster. I have no idea where you even got that from. The destruction is still treated as a tragedy, not a spectacle. Sure, the narrations by Raymond Burr's character lessen the impact, but they didn't make it into a blockbuster.
Godzilla has turned the heart of Tokyo into a sea of fire. Beneath the flames, thousands lie dead or dying.
And it still has meaning. Godzilla is still an allegory for nuclear weapons, just a lesser one. Nukes were what still made him.
It is my belief that Godzilla was resurrected due to the repeated experiments of H-bombs.
It's the lesser film, I agree. But to think of it as a blockbuster with no meaning tells me you either have the media literacy of an inbred toddler, or you're just making shit up to fit your narrative. Either way, you look like a tool.
And no surprise, Godzilla King of the Monsters made way more money than Gojira. So much so that Japan stopped calling him Gojira and took on Godzilla and repainted his image as the savior of Japan that fought giant monsters.
First off, America had a better post-war economy than Japan at the time. No shit it would make more money. Second, where the fuck are you pulling this from? They can still call him Gojira. You watched -1. You should know this.
Gojira. -1.
And how is Godzilla becoming a hero figure during the Showa era America's fault? But evidence is gay, so we move on.
529 million, 387 million. They're making money, and that's all that matters now. But what is art, and how do we view art?
How in the fuck are you going to give a lesson on art in less than 2 minutes when you haven't even explained your main arguments correctly? But more importantly, I fail to see why all of this is relevant.
Is a nothing blockbuster funded by the US military better than a $15 million Japanese film with a lot to say because it made more money? Is King of the Monsters better than Gojira since it made more money? We're beginning to look at box office as this risk-reward system, where studios don't see the risk of making something if it can't possibly 10 times its original budget.
It would depend on how everything is executed. Ideas are cheap. How those ideas are handled is what matters. -1 executes its ideas better than the current American batch. A film can have a lot to say and be shit, while a film that doesn't have a lot to say can be excellent. A blockbuster can be a masterclass at storytelling, where a low-budget art house film can be the drizzling shits. You get the point. And literally, no one with a functioning brain will say that because something made more money, it's better than the thing that made less. Who the fuck are you arguing against? Yes, the box office is a risk-reward system. You are trying to make a profit off the investment you've put down. The more you put down, the more the movie has to make. And that's not even getting into advertising and reshoots and the like. Granted, studios should make movies on lower budgets since they could allow for more experimentation and better chances of making their money back, but I digress.
If Barbie didn't make $1 billion, was it a waste of time? If Oppenheimer didn't almost make $1 billion, was that too a waste of time? And this rubs off how we view movies.
Citation needed, good sir. Lots of citations, actually.
If something makes a lot of money, it must be good. And if a movie flops, it must be bad.
Could you please give Mr. Hitchens his razor back? He's concerned you're going to hurt yourself.
It's the same as judging a book by its cover. Yes, there's movies that spend way too much money not being creative because they believe they could 10 times their budget by simply existing. But then we get films like Gojira and Godzilla -1, which are real creative works of art that stand for something and matter aside from just money.
And it's starting to fail. The Marvels and Quantumania show this. The idea an MCU movie could flop wasn't an impossibility, but certainly unexpected. People are starting to get tired of sludge-drenched scripts backed by terrible effects. But even then, they still have things to say. It's executed horrifically, but it's still there.
But like how everything works, Godzilla isn't liked because of what it stands for, because what America saw was a cool giant monster that attacked Japan, not an allegory for nuclear war.
Not entirely accurate. It's frustrating hearing people complain about the human element simply existing in Godzilla films. However, Godzilla doesn't have to be that, and hasn't been that for a good portion of the franchise's lifespan. You're yelling at America for doing something the Japanese did to a far greater extent, far longer, and barely acknowledged it.
And what they see now is a Superman figure that could sell toys. Godzilla has become a mascot to make money. It's why I can't enjoy the Looney Tunes version. It's why Godzilla can't work in America.
Not a Superman figure. Using a character to print money is not an inherently bad thing as long as you have the talent to back it up with a solid script. You really think Toho doesn't know Godzilla's global appeal? You really think they would have made -1 if they didn't think they'd make money? Of course you don't. If using Godzilla to make money is a reason that it doesn't work in America, then it doesn't work in Japan either.
But when it works in Japan, it works, and it works well. But if there's anything I can hope to get across with this video, it's to research the things you watch.
Okay, we're done here. The bitter irony of putting that statement at the end of this video is enough to turn me into Peter Turbo. What can really be said about such a video? It is poorly researched, heavily biased despite Skipper saying otherwise, and contains irrelevant diatribes and a plethora of unsubstantiated claims, all of which are trying to argue a concept can't work, which is hard enough as it is. Especially doing so with a character as pliable as Godzilla. One has to bring in some very compelling evidence for such a thing. Not only did Skipper fail to bring compelling evidence, it's arguable that Skipper brought evidence in the first place. If evidence is an available body of facts or information indicating whether a belief or proposition is true or valid, then Skipper did none of that. This isn't helped by his abysmal explanatory skills, which are somehow on par with Bob Chipman's. It's a microcosm of all that is wrong with video essays. Vague, unsupported statements like, "It doesn't stand for anything, there's no meaning, it's safe, it has heart," etc. Hollow statements that have no supporting references. Absolutely nonsensical interpretations like how America made Godzilla into a hero to kill the Japanese monsters because it's military propaganda, despite every piece of evidence showing otherwise. Interpretations so off the mark and so idiotic that it makes you think why they have any kind of unironic following. Trying so hard to confirm the bias they have that they don't pay attention. But the thing I personally find frustrating about this video is that it shouldn't be this hard to criticize the Monsterverse in its current state. Because I agree that the Monsterverse doesn't work. Not in concept, but execution. Mechanically, this entire universe has been broken. Integral statements and scenes no longer make sense. Why can humans walk around in Hollow Earth if the closer you get to the core, the more radioactive it gets? Where are all the monsters that bowed to Godzilla at the end of King of the Monsters? Why is the entire world static despite several world-ending events? And that's just Godzilla vs. Kong. I could go on how everything after Skull Island annihilates any consistency this retarded universe had. In many cases, you have to read external material in order to get any kind of answer to these questions. Questions that should be answered by the films themselves. Those are a few of the many, many reasons why the Monsterverse mechanically shits itself into a coma. Skipper didn't just miss the mark, he shot himself in the face. It doesn't help that he insinuates things like racism or flat out calls things propaganda with nothing to back up the claim. Which brings me to my final point. I've stated that I believe Skipper is being dishonest, at least to some degree. To imply the 2014 film being anti-Japanese requires someone to be blind, deaf, and lobotomized. And since Skipper has shown us he's watched the American films with referencing the deaths Godzilla caused in 2014, as well as having some level of media literacy with being correct on Gojira and -1, unless you want to say that his bias against movies that have military help with production is so intense he cannot set it aside, or he really is that stupid, Skipper is misleading his audience on what's in these films and what their intentions are. I could certainly be wrong, of course, but everything leads me to believe that he's trying to prove his predetermined conclusion and confirm his bias by misrepresenting what the film shows us. Granted, I'm not saying he's being dishonest about everything, just the whole anti-Japanese propaganda nonsense. Because, I mean, a Japanese man in the movie whose father died in Hiroshima ended up being correct. So, yeah. I do think that the public domain bit was an honest mistake, and him stating American Godzilla doesn't stand for anything is his bias getting in the way of his analysis. He has admitted on Twitter that he did get some things wrong. In reality, it was almost everything, but it's something, I guess. I know I'm late on this, but I wanted to take my time with this and try to be as accurate as possible. And while I'll admit that a part of my intention was trying to capitalize on the controversy surrounding Skipper's video, at least what's left, that's not the entire reason or even most of it. It really did just annoy me that much, and I hope I've convinced anyone who thought this video was good that it's not, or at least gave them something to think about. Anyways, that's all for now. Until next time.